Hey everybody, welcome back to Carnivore Vitality. Today we have a super special guest. We have Dr. Anthony Chaffee. This man has blown up recently in the carnivore space and has just hit 100,000 followers on Instagram. So Dr. Chaffee, would you like to just introduce yourself, maybe how long you've been on carnivore and how you got into carnivore?
Yeah, well, thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. My name is Dr. Anthony Chaffee. I'm an American doctor. I currently live in Australia and specializing in neurosurgery. And I've just had a particular interest in diet and nutrition and how that affects our health, and specifically athletic performance is how I got into it, and now chronic disease now that I'm in the medical profession. So I got into this about 22 years ago when I was playing rugby and in college, and took cancer biology and botany and learned just how toxic plants were and how this is how they naturally defend themselves. And this is something that we would know intuitively. You go in the woods, you get lost and you run out of food. You can't just eat any random plant because most of them will make you very, very sick or even kill you. And that's a very, very well-known, well-documented phenomenon. And so we were learning that from a cancer perspective when I was taking cancer biology, and just learned how many carcinogens these things had as well, and that they were actually far more carcinogenic and toxic than the pesticides we were using on them. And we've known that since the 1980s. So I was quite taken aback by that. My professor actually even said to us, that he didn't eat salads, he didn't eat vegetables, he wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables, and that, in his words, plants are trying to kill you. And so it really stuck with me. And I just said, right, I'm not going to eat any plants. I don't want any of that nonsense in my body. And I just stopped eating plants. So I just defaulted into a carnivore diet, just eating eggs, meat, and milk, and mostly just meat and sometimes milk. And I felt absolutely amazing. And my athletic performance went through the roof. And I did that for a number of years, sort of slipped off of it because I didn't really realize how significant it was. And then sort of 5-6 years ago, came back across it and came across evidence to say, no, actually biologically humans really are carnivores. And that's just the kind of animal we are. And so, I stopped eating plants again. So I've been now back on this for a solid 5 years, if not going on 6, something around there.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that. Now, the first question that I want to ask is about someone that's pretty famous in the carnivore space, carnivore MD, Paul Saladino.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul Saladino, as you know, was a carnivore for around 2 years, and then he started having a couple problems. He had electrolyte issues and his testosterone tanked. What kind of happened there with Paul Saladino? Where do you think that he went wrong?
Well, it's a good question. And I haven't met Paul myself. I have a lot of respect for him. I really like his stuff. But I don't know him personally, but, so you have to sort of make suppositions based on limited information. But, he had these issues, which are obviously, very, very troubling, and you don't want to go through them yourself. He attributed it to lack of carbohydrates, and that being in ketosis for too long is actually harmful to you. I don't think that that's true necessarily. I think we have quite a lot of studies looking at ketosis, the work of people like Professor Steve Phinney, who's been doing this for decades, looking at this. Obviously, the work of people like Weston A. Price and all different anthropologists looking at people that have never eaten carbohydrates their entire life, generationally, and they're very, very fit and healthy. Our ancestors during the ice ages, who had no access to anything sugar or carb related for eons, however long they were in there, and then people such as myself and others doing carnivore long term or even keto long term, decades, a lot of people, and not having these same issues. So I don't think it was the carbohydrates. There could be a number of other things. He does eat a lot of organs that could potentially give him hypervitaminosis. When you eat carbohydrates, that actually increases your body's demand for vitamins. And when and so you can, if you have excess sort of vitamins and having hypervitaminosis, and you raise your threshold with carbohydrates, that could now put you into a so-called normal level of that as well. He was having problems with his thyroid as well. Hypervitaminosis A, for example, is known to suppress TSH, which will then suppress the production of thyroid as well. But there's a number of other things. I don't know exactly what caused his issues, but I don't think that the evidence would really support that it was purely a lack of carbohydrates. I think something else was going on there. And I've certainly never had that problem myself. And I've been doing this for quite a number of years. And in my patients as well, I have a couple hundred, few hundred patients at this point, all on a carnivore diet for the last 3 years. And we track their bloods and we track their progress. They have not had these problems. In fact, I haven't had anybody who has had that problem. And we do monitor their bloods and their testosterone and estrogen and all their hormones, and obviously their electrolytes. And we troubleshoot issues if they're having cramps and so forth. Haven't come into that problem. Haven't seen that at all. I don't push my patients into having a whole bunch of organs. I don't think that they're strictly needed, and certainly not in excess of what proportion you're going to find in the animal. Like if you have an entire buffalo, that the meat on that thing is going to feed you for 2 years as an individual, right? But it only has one liver. So you're going to have one liver for the course of 2 years. And so I don't think you need to eat a large amount of liver just every single day. So that's the thing. So to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know exactly what causes issue, but I really don't think that it was a lack of carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Cool. So a lot of people know that processed sugars and sugars are bad. However, people say, oh, fruit's good because the sugar's natural and stuff. And I know you've talked about this a lot. Do you think there's any need for any carbs or any sugar in your body? What's your thoughts on that?
Not that you take in dietarily. Your body does make carbohydrates. Your body does make blood sugar, liver glycogen, muscle glycogen to exacting degrees. So that's another reason why I don't think there's too much of an issue with not eating carbohydrates, because your body makes the stuff. And so you really shouldn't have a problem like that. The whole argument of being natural doesn't really go too far, because they're saying, well, it's natural sugar. I was like, well, arsenic's natural. That's not really good for you. Hemlock's natural. That will kill you. But sugar is sugar is sugar. It's just a chemical, right? And so whether or not you get that chemical in sugar, packet of sugar, or you get that from an apple, the substance itself is the same. Now you'll be getting other things with the apple as well that may provide benefit apart from the sugar, but it will have that sugar, and that sugar will act the same in both circumstances, and particularly fructose, which is the sweetest part of sugar. Table sugar is a disaccharide. So this is a glucose molecule bound to a fructose molecule. Your body cleaves those and you absorb those separately. High fructose corn syrup is just a mixture of fructose and glucose, and it ends up being the same thing, amounts to the same thing. So that's the same kind of sugar that's in fruit. So it's not like it's a different kind of sugar. It's not like it's special for some reason. It's just that people like fruit and they want to justify eating fruit.
Do you think that there is something about fruit that makes it any better than processed sugar, or it's seriously like, you're comparing apples with apples? It's the same thing.
Yeah. The sugar, I think, is exactly the same, with a caveat. Fiber, probably the only benefit I've ever come across with fiber is that it delays the absorption of certain nutrients. And if you're eating stupid things and things that aren't good for you, it will delay the absorption of those things as well, and maybe even stop them. And so if you're eating fruit and fructose and has fiber, then that fiber is going to delay that a bit, so you won't absorb as much. But fruit juice, that will all go. And and obviously they'll have other things. They'll have vitamins and minerals and things like that are good for you. But they come with other things, and it's not just the sugar either, because fruit does contain defense chemicals as well. It's not just the rest of the plant. Generally, there are less in the fruits that we eat, but that doesn't mean that there are none. Look, the citrus family has coumarins, which are toxins, and our body is able to clear these out. But you only have a limited capacity to do that, and then you run out of the enzymes in your liver that detoxify these things. This is why you don't take like grapefruit or grapefruit juice with certain medications, because it's those same enzymes that are breaking down the coumarins in grapefruit that are also metabolizing your medications or certain medications, and so you can get either ineffective dose or toxicity from your medication if you're taking it with grapefruit juice because of that. And so that's an evidence of your body detoxifying things. Now, can your body detoxify it and handle it? Yeah, sure. But that doesn't mean that it's completely safe. And then there are tons of fruit around the world that will just kill you. I mean, most berries, wild berries are going to be harmful to you. They're going to cause problems or even kill you. And there are tons of other fruits. There's over 150 different sort of fruits that, like the cassowary bird, for instance, eats, and every single one of those fruits will kill you or kill basically any other animal that eats them, because the plant wants the cassowary bird to eat them, because the seed germinates in the cassowary bird's gut. It's not going to germinate anywhere else. And so if the cassowary bird doesn't eat that fruit, that seed will not turn into a plant, and that's not in the plant's best interest. And so while the plant may want something to eat its fruit, it doesn't necessarily want you to eat the fruit. And so that's not something that's going to be devoid of toxins, certainly. And not least of all will be sugar. While most things that have like fructose in it seem to have less defense chemicals, that's true. It's not going to be devoid of them, but the fructose and the sugar itself can cause harm. And so that's probably my main issue with fruit.
Yep. Just to jump in there and to kind of go back to Paul Saladino, he was talking. I was listening to him talk about the Randle cycle and how it's something that's not something that's of concern to him, and he doesn't worry about it. I heard a lot of people in the carnivore space kind of talking about the Randle cycle, how it can be quite damaging. Do you want to just kind of explain the Randle cycle and whether we should be worried about it or not?
Yeah, so the Randle cycle is something I think discovered in like the 1970s. It's something that people like Professor Bart Kay has done a few videos on. They're very, very good. He goes into the exact mechanisms of that if people want an in-depth look at that. But basically what it says is that if your cell is being flooded with an abundance of energy, by carbohydrates or fat, it's going to say, okay, that's enough. We're going to protect ourselves, and we're not, instead of having overabundance of this and gumming up the works of the cell and the mitochondria, it shuts it down and makes the barrier resistant to fat and carbohydrates coming in, and so those stay in the circulation and they have to get stored in as fat as well. So the argument is that if you're eating carbohydrates, that will shut off your cell to to fats, and then so that fat, instead of being used as energy, will then just go into fat storage. And if you're again cutting things off, it also will stop the allowing carbohydrates from coming in the cell as well, and that will raise your blood sugar, and this can be maybe seen as insulin resistance as well, because this is telling insulin like, hey, we're not going to listen to you. I think there's probably a combination. I think that people do, even when they stop eating carbohydrates, it does take a while for their body to normalize and become more sensitive to insulin. So that's something that in practice, I've seen it just take a little while for people to bounce back from, but they can, and most of the time they do. Sometimes people, if they've been type 2 diabetic for a long time, they may not be completely able to make and maintain their own insulin. They may need a bit of insulin, but the sensitivity comes back. They don't have to take copious amounts of insulin or other medications to try to force energy into cells, and their blood sugars is very, very well controlled after that. So so that's sort of the Randle cycle in a nutshell, is that if you start taking in a bunch of carbohydrates, it can just sort of gum things up.
So do you reckon if there's someone that has gone more animal based, like Paul Saladino, and you're not going as crazy as him, how he's having 200 to 400 grams of carbohydrates, but if you're only having 50 grams of carbs because you just want to try and get a really good workout in one day, do you think just a little bit of carbs is kind of going to make this process happen and you're going to get fat? Or how do you, practically, do you think it's something to worry about?
Yeah, well, I think from my point of view, I think what's more important is that, first of all, high blood sugar is dangerous. It damages your body. So the glucose molecules physically fuse to other molecules in your body and damage them. Fructose actually does this independently and does it harder, does it worse. And so that's what kills diabetics, this direct damage to your body from high blood sugar, chronically high blood sugar. So your body tries to defend this by raising your insulin, and insulin disrupts a lot of your metabolic processes and screws with your biochemistry in a number of different ways. And so that's a problem that I see with eating carbohydrates, even a small amount, is that you're going to get that insulin spike, and that's going to sort of derail your body's metabolism. And when your insulin goes up, it forces energy into cells. It doesn't allow it to come out of cells, and it will actually lock down your fat cells. So it blocks proteolysis, it blocks lipolysis. So now all that energy that you've taken in is now locked in your fat cells, and you can't actually use it for energy. So then you sort of get tired, don't feel very good, and you have to eat more carbs to sort of wake yourself up. And this is where we start chasing our tail with eating carbohydrates. And so maybe you get like a bit of a boost when you're working out, but it won't last too long, and you'll end up crashing. And then your insulin stays up, because insulin stays up for a long time. It has a long half-life, and you won't be able to make energy very well. Now, people say like, oh, well, you'll get a better workout if you eat carbohydrates. I've never found that myself. I've actually found quite the opposite. I've found that when I don't eat carbohydrates, I feel much better because my body's making carbohydrates. I have carbohydrates in my body. I have blood sugar. I have liver glycogen. And when I'm working out, when I'm pushing myself, my body actually triggers my body to secrete more energy and burn more energy, which actually makes me feel better, which makes me work out harder, which makes me burn more energy, which makes me feel better. And it's this positive feedback loop, and I feel better and better. And, speaking about, Professor Finney, I saw him at a conference, medical conference over in Gold Coast last month. And he was talking about research that they had done, actual controlled trial where they had, two groups, one in fat adapted ketosis, and the other just eating normal carbs and everything like that. And they tracked their workouts, they tracked their exercise performance and everything like that, and how much oxygen they were using, their respiration rate, metabolic rate, and all these different markers. And they found that they you didn't get an advantage from eating carbohydrates. They're basically about the same. Then, interestingly enough, they switched the groups. So they had all the groups that were fat adapted and keto started eating carbs, and the people that were eating a bunch of carbs, you put them onto keto. You had them on there for I think it was 40 days, 42 days or something like that. And then they started testing them again. And again, they found that you could go back and forth without issue. So you didn't need carbohydrates. And this is obviously Professor Tim Noakes, who used to be all about, you got a carbo load, you need carb to burn carbs. He was that guy. He made that very popular, back in the 70s and 80s and onwards. And now he's done a full reversal. He's like, oh my God, I got it completely wrong. It was absolutely backwards. Or maybe that was Noakes who did that experiment. Sorry, that wasn't Steve Finney. That was Noakes that did that exercise tolerance test. So, there's a lot of evidence for that. So I find that I would just work out a lot better. So if you're eating carbs, you sort of have to keep eating carbs in order to maintain your blood sugar and your energy levels. But if you don't eat carbs at all, your body does it for you. And I think that's a much more efficient way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because a lot of our mates, they found out about a YouTube channel, and they go to the gym and stuff, and they're like, oh, I want to put on size, so I'm not going to do the carnivore diet because I need the carbs to look fuller and to gain more muscle. So what's your sort of thoughts on that?
So your muscles may look more full, but think about like a steak that's been marbled, right? How do they do that? They feed them a bunch of grains. They put them in a grain feedlot, where you get the Wagyus, where they're eating just grain and alcohol and sugar their whole life, and you get that intramuscular fat. And that's what happens to our body as well. That's what happens when you eat carbohydrates. And so your body trying to get this excess glucose out of your system because it's damaging you, it just stuffs it into every nook and cranny that it can, including your muscles. And so it deposits intramuscular fat, which can make your muscles look bigger. Your arm looks bigger, but it's just full of fat. And then glycogen as well. You're going to have more glycogen in your muscles. Glycogen will store on water molecules, and we'll sort of draw those in. And so you sort of plump up your muscles. But again, that's water. That's not you. So you have soggy muscles. You don't have, lean muscle mass. And now maybe that's beneficial, the morning of a day before a morning of like a bodybuilding expedition, right? or this is like, like Ronnie Coleman and those guys, they'd eat like a pizza the night before, and have some shots of alcohol or something like that. And they would, and that would like plump up their muscles and sort of dehydrate them a little bit. And they would look, a bit bigger. So maybe that's an advantage there, but in general, but it's not actually going to build lean muscle mass. It's not actually going to benefit you in the long run. It's just going to make you, look like something you're not for a second, and then it goes away. So it's like fool's gold, it goes away. You look at like the golden era bodybuilders, like Randle, Serge Newbray. Yeah, it was just steak and eggs. That's what they're eating. Newbray ate, 6 pounds of horse meat a day. Like that was just beast. And and he was an absolute unit up until the day he died. He died in his 70s from foul play. And I think like one of his kids actually poisoned him. But the guy was an absolute monster. I saw pictures of him sort of next to each other, like in his prime lifting days, and then like in his late 60s. I mean, the guy was, his face was more weathered, but his body was still just a specimen. And, that's what he was doing, just eating just a ton of meat. So, what are your muscles? Your muscles are meat, right? So what's going to have everything that you need to build and maintain meat, right? So like, it's just, skip the middleman, just get what you need.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts on the whole calories in versus calories out thing? I've heard Bart K talk about it a bit. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's way too symptomatic to say like, oh, it's just calories in, calories out. That's all there is to it. Like, obviously, it's much more complicated than that. When you consider the fact that these molecules are complex organic biochemical compounds, right? So they're going to have complex interactions with the rest of your biochemistry. And anyone who took biochemistry should know this, and organic chemistry should know this. So that means every doctor in America, right? And yet there are so many doctors in America that have completely lost. This has been completely lost on them. Look at all the different fatty acids, all of these things. Oh, it's just fat. That's just calories. That's all it is. Just 9 calories per gram. That's the only thing that happens. Like, obviously that's not true. These have physical reactions in your body. They do different things. Same thing with all the different proteins. There are tons of different proteins. There are dozens of different carbohydrates. They all do different things. They have different chemical reactions in your body. They work differently. And so you cannot just boil them down to just the amount of calories they have. That's insane reductionism. And it's just a silly way of looking at things. Also, you have to consider, depending on what you eat, your body is your metabolism is going to go up or down. So if you're limiting calories, your body is just going to respond and say, hey, we're in a famine, times are rough. We need to hunker down. We need to stop, using so much energy. We need to store energy. In fact, we can't be burning energy. We're going to die. And so our bodies are actually pretty brilliant in that regard. And so if you're stuck in a siege, you're not going to be, and you're eating boots and rats and things like that, you're not going to be pumping out the same amount of basal caloric output that you would otherwise. Also, depending on what you eat, you will have different basal metabolic rates. So, we know from biochemistry that if you say you have, 2 diets, 2,000 calories each, and one incorporates carbohydrates into that 2,000 calories, the other does not. So you're in ketosis. The person in ketosis will, on average, have burned 300 more kilocalories a day on average. Okay. So that increases your basal metabolic rate by 300.
Wow.
Right. So that right there, saying calories in, calories out, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe when you get down to it, but how the hell do you know exactly how much you're putting out? And, and the stuff that you're putting in as well will affect that. So you're really not going to understand exactly, what your basal metabolic rate and how much energy you're using is. And also when you're eating carbohydrates, again, insulin goes up. Insulin will slow down your metabolism. That's why you're not going to be pushing out as much as you would before. And also, where are you getting these calories? Because you're forcing energy into your cells. You're going to be replenishing fat cells. But then when your insulin's up, you really can't access your fat cells. So you have to just keep eating. and you tend to overeat as well. Now you can limit that, and you can starve yourself and be miserable and hungry all the time. But that's not necessarily sustainable, and you're not going to feel good. You're not going to have good energy. So there's a lot more that goes into it, I think. And also I think at the end of the day, what you eat is very important. And animals in the wild, they know what to eat. They don't have I've never seen a koala with a calculator figuring out these macros. They just eat, because nature is natural. It just happens on its own. And so if what you're eating is such that you would overeat if you were just there left to your own devices, there's something wrong happening there. You should be able to eat fairly intuitively. The normal person should, unless you're on medications or have some issue. So generally when you see people go on a carnivore diet or even keto diet, they self-limit their calories after a certain extent. Now my caloric intake actually went up, and I dropped 10 kilos in 10 days, and so it's and then I maintained, and I just started shredding fat and stacking on muscle, but I maintained my same weight. So when people go onto a carnivore diet, they can calories will change around, but in the long run, if you look at these people when they go onto these sorts of diets, they tend to start reducing the amount of calories that they eat naturally. And people like Rhonda Patrick would just say, oh, see, just calories in, calories out. They just self-limit that. And I look at that and go wow, how amazing is that without doing anything special, their body just says, hey, that's enough. That's what we need. And it perfectly tracks and monitors how much calories and nutrition that your body needs. I think that's amazing. And I think that's indicative that you're eating the right thing, that your body is able to use that information and say, this is how much we need. Stop right there. We don't need any more. And so I've never counted a calorie in my entire life, and I certainly don't now. I eat until I'm full. I eat meat when it tastes good, and I stop when it stops tasting that good. And that's what I think is the natural thing to do. And so I just trust my body and let it do its thing. And I maintain, under 10% body fat without working out and eating to satiation every single day.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I find with my patients as well. I tell them, don't count your calories. In fact, generally, well, unless you're just not eating enough, sometimes you want to sort of track me like, hey, are you getting enough? But generally I just don't have them track, and they do better when they don't track.
I've got a question about people. There's a lot of people in our comments sometimes, and I see on other videos as well. They say, I've tried the carnivore diet. I've been on it for a month, but I'm not losing any weight. What would you kind of say to them, and what piece of advice would you give to people that are trying to lose weight on carnivore, but right now can't?
Yeah. So it's something you have to dig a lot into quite deeply, because carnivore diet means different things to different people. Most of the time, what it means to them is they're eating more meat, and they're eating less of other things. But that doesn't mean that they're exclusively eating meat and eating fatty meat and not eating anything else. And a lot of times when I talk to people who, it's funny, they say that I failed. Carnivores failed me. It didn't work for me. You talk to them, and it's like, yeah, my autoimmune issue reversed. My skin got better. My hair got better. My psoriasis went away. My asthma is gone. All these things, but I didn't lose weight. So I guess, it failed me. And I was like, well, I don't know. It sounds like you were doing pretty great. And then you go back to eating all the things that you were before, and all those problems come back. So actually, I think things were going very well. But when I talk to a lot of these people, I asked them, okay, what exactly were you eating? Were you only eating meat, only drinking water? Were you, having any artificial sweeteners? Were you drinking coffee? Were you doing this, doing that? Almost always they are including some form of artificial sweetener. That's generally the hitch. Or they're eating a ton of dairy or something like that. Some people just can't handle that. So oftentimes people are still incorporating other things. And oftentimes there's artificial sweeteners. I talked to a number of people. Artificial sweeteners are really, really hard for a lot of people to get off of. And some people actually get serious withdrawals, so after a few days, they just feel like they have horrible flu. They just feel miserable, migraines and body aches and all. It's like they're coming off heroin or something like that. And they end up folding because they just feel so miserable. Whereas unfortunately, if they just stuck with it, a few more days or another week, they'd be off it, and the monkey would be off their back. So that's quite often what happens. Then another thing is, again, if you're not eating enough, you can actually tell your body, hey, we're in a famine. Okay, maybe this is the right food and this is the right stuff for my body, but you're still getting, such a minimal amount that your body just says, hey, we need to hang on to what we got. And so your metabolic rate will be quite low. So it's actually very easy for people to undereat on a carnivore diet. And so that's why I tell people, you really want to make sure that you're eating enough fat, especially. Almost everyone doesn't eat enough fat because you actually need a lot of fat. And when people say, oh, I'm definitely eating enough fat, they consider enough fat they consider they're eating enough fat because they're eating way more fat than they've ever eaten in their life. And so it has to be enough because, my God, who could eat any more of this? But it tends to not be enough. And so if you're getting constipated and things like that, I think by definition, then you're constipated, because if you're just absorbing every ounce of fat that you're eating and none is sort of spilling over because your body only has a limited capacity to absorb fat, then I think that you're not getting as much fat as your body wants. And so you want to get as much as your body wants and then a little extra. So that goes off into your stools, keeps it soft. That's a good way of looking at it. If you're drinking coffee, that can mask that because that's a laxative. So are artificial sweeteners. And so there are a lot of things that go into it. But not eating enough is a major one because, when you eat carbohydrates, insulin goes up. Insulin blocks leptin, which is, tells your body and your brain that you're satiated. You don't need to eat anymore. And so when insulin blocks that, your brain gets this signal that you don't have any leptin, so you don't have any energy reserves. And so it gets a little panicked, and then it sees that you don't have anything in your stomach and your blood sugar is dropping. So it freaks out and says, my God, we're going to starve to death, and sends out a panic signal that says, you have to eat, you have to eat, you have to eat. And so even if you've already had more than enough calories for that day, you'll keep eating because you don't actually know what satiation is. So that can happen as well. When you stop eating carbohydrates, all of a sudden you don't feel that sensation anymore. And so people say, well, I'm just not hungry. Well, you have to relearn your hunger signals because you are hungry. It's just a much more subtle signal at that point. And so I go by taste. If meat tastes good, that means you're hungry. You're getting a positive feedback from your body saying, hey, this is good. We want this. Bring that in. And obviously that can happen with sugar as well, but sugar is a drug. Sugar is addictive and can give you different sort of signals because of that. Same with carbohydrates, but that's pathological. That's not something that's going to help us. So when you're eating just meat, you can actually listen to your body signals, and you can actually listen to the taste of things. And so if meat doesn't taste good, then you're not hungry, right? But if it does taste good, you are, and you should listen to that, and you should keep eating. So I encourage people to try to eat fatty meat until it stops tasting good, and try that a couple times a day, at least 2-3 times a day, and just see. Check your body. And if you're feeling a bit tired, you're feeling a bit off, something's a bit, not right, try eating. Ask yourself, does this mean I'm hungry? Try eating. If meat tastes good, you're hungry. Keep eating until it doesn't taste good. So people can undereat, and undereat can actually, funny enough, stall weight loss. Dairy can also stall weight loss. That's something I've seen a number of times as well. Yeah. Then you boil down to probably about 1% of people that have trouble losing weight on a carnivore diet who are doing everything right. There are this very small subset of people who, for some reason, aren't able to lose weight right away, but they feel better. Their health is much improved. Their energy is through the roof. They're sleeping better. Their medical issues, if they have any, are much improved. And but unfortunately, they're not losing weight. You can also be gaining muscle while you're losing fat, and that just offsets it too. So that's another thing to think about, is just look at how your clothes are fitting. How you look in the mirror and be like, oh, wow, I'm looking slender. My clothes are fitting more loosely. Well, the scale says the same. Well, obviously something's happening. Your body composition is changing. It's just your weight is staying the same. And that's fine. Weight doesn't matter. It's health and body composition. That's what you need to be looking for. Health first, body composition distant second, weight never. Don't worry about it. And then some of these people that legitimately are not losing fat, they can, there's something going on hormonally. I haven't figured out exactly what's going on yet. But there are a lot of different sorts of things going on that your hormones can get dysregulated. Leptin, you have leptin resistance, leptin insensitivity, as well as insulin sensitivity and things like that. And sometimes they say if your leptin goes above a certain level, that you will not ever be able to lose weight. You have to get bariatric surgery and get your stomach, ripped out of you. I have seen the opposite of that, though. I've seen people go on a carnivore diet and their leptin start dropping precipitously right away, and they start losing weight. So, but I think there's something going on there, probably with leptin, probably with hormonal signals, where your body's just really, really out there, and it takes a while to heal, and it takes a while for these things to get back into normal ranges. But I think eventually they will. Some people, maybe they've done some permanent harm to their hormonal signaling, but I haven't run into someone who hasn't been able to heal that. But it can take time. Like Kelly Hogan, she was doing everything right by the sounds of it, although she was using artificial sweeteners for a long time. But she was like gaining weight for like 6 months, but she felt amazing. So she's like, okay, I'm just going to see this through. And then after that, there's just this tipping point, weight just started just falling off of her. So, and now she's, very, very slender and, high energy. So that is probably longer version than you guys wanted, but that's that. I think that covers most of them.
That was amazing. Yeah.
I've had a bit of a question as well, because I've lost quite a lot of weight in the carnivore diet. In 3 months, and I've lost 23 kilos. And a lot of, when I was losing weight, I was at the start, so I didn't really know. I was restricting myself a little bit. I was doing a bit of water fasting and stuff. And I know you were talking about that famine example, but for some reason, when I was water fasting, all the weight was just coming off. Yeah. And now, do you think to lose a last bit of weight for people in like my shoes, they should actually maybe try increase the caloric intake, but make it so nutrient dense foods that it's just your body would just get rid of the fat on your stomach, on your body? Or
yeah, I think the main thing is obviously giving your body, the right nutrition. Meat is very, very nutrient dense and has everything that you need in the proportion that you need it. It's very good for that, and without all the extra fluff and nonsense. And fasting can help. I mean, that's there's no question about that. I mean, you look at refugee camps and concentration camps, like people are getting very, very skinny by starvation, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best way of doing it. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's going to keep your metabolism in tip-top shape. You look at like the biggest, there was something I was reading a while ago. It was just an article, it wasn't like a big, scientific study or anything like that, but it was an article talking about that show, The Biggest Loser, where they have like all those contestants and they try to lose weight, and they just these crash diets, starving, just eating rabbit food and like just exercising, crazy amounts. And then people lose a bunch of weight, and of course they do. But apparently it just absolutely crashes their metabolism. So as soon as they stop eating rabbit food, their body's just like store fat. Yeah. Because your body's just like, it's freaking out because it thinks you're dying. And, and so, it gets, to the point that you've actually damaged your metabolism by dieting in that manner. And they studied these guys like years later. I think it was like 6 years after this particular event of The Biggest Loser, and they found that their metabolism was still tanked. Right.
Wow.
So it still hadn't recovered yet. Now, is that because they're still following those same guidelines and those same patterns of just barely eating and exercising to the nth degree? I don't know. Or is it just because they just never recover and they gain all the weight and all these sorts of problems? But either way, like, if you wanted to fast every now and then, that can be helpful. There are certain instances I think that actually can be helpful, especially when you're sort of relearning and resetting your body and your relationship with food, and sort of seeing what hunger feels like, how it actually is okay that you don't need to eat, for a day or two. I do that sometimes too, but it's not out of from choice. It's just out of necessity. Like if I'm on call and I'm working, I can't leave the hospital and I'm operating all night and I'm in, work the next day. I'm just not going to eat. I'm not going to eat for a day and a half, 2 days. And that's fine. My body can handle that. And it's good to know that my body can handle that. And so sometimes it's good to maybe, have a day of fasting every now and then, just to sort of reset the body, and just sort of show you what that feels like, and then get a better relationship with food. But I think most people, by and large, would benefit from just eating what their body tells them to.
Yep.
And certainly long term, I mean, maybe fasting in the beginning or something like that, maybe for some people, but I think most people don't need it. And I think long term, you should just be able to eat what your body's telling you to. And I've had times where I was just like, okay, I've spent this whole day doing these things. I worked out for 6 hours. I was just getting back into rugby, and I was just like, I need to eat. I need to eat because I'm going to be doing this the next day. And everything in my body was saying, don't do it. That sounds awful. And, so I just, and I tried eating, and it just tasted terrible. I was just like, God, I'm just really not enjoying this. I'm just forcing myself. And so I just stopped, so that happens too. Your body may tell you, you don't need to eat today. In fact, you don't want to eat today. And you can certainly run into that when you have a lot of excess body fat and you're trying to lose that as well.
One thing I heard was there's this famous YouTuber called Stephanie Buttermore, and she did something where she went all in with her diet. She's not a carnivore, but yeah, it's kind of similar to what you were talking about before, how her metabolism was really had tanked. It was really low, and she was just finding if she didn't stick to a super strict diet, she just gained fat super easily. So she kind of let herself go, almost still eating a lot of whole foods, but just let herself go, just eating as much as she wanted. And sure, she did gain quite a few kilos or pounds or whatever in the first almost year of it. And she got up to a point where, she was, gained quite a lot of weight. But that's what she needed to do. And then after that, she kind of reset her metabolism, and then she kind of slowly went back down to a really healthy weight. And now she, looks amazing. Like, have you seen that transformation with a lot of carnivores as well?
Yeah. So it depends on, if someone's coming into carnivore and they like had, I mean, some people come into it because they've had, instead of weight, heavy, being heavy, maybe they're too light, and they've been having, maybe eating disorders and, very unhealthy relationship with food. Some of those people will start putting on weight and they'll actually be quite worried about it. And they're like, I don't want to put on weight. I don't want to put on weight. And that sort of scares them. But if it's just meat and you're not forcing yourself to do anything, I would consider that, just like you say, healthy weight and something healthy that your body's going to be going through, trying to heal, some of these issues and years of sort of mistreating your body. And then eventually your body's sort of going to get to a point like, okay, I'm happy. And then it'll sort of stabilize down and go back down to a more healthy weight. I think that I have seen that. A lot of people get very worried about that, but I just try to encourage them. It's very difficult when people have sort of body dysmorphia and especially eating disorders. It's very hard for them to allow themselves to put on weight. It's very, very difficult. And so that's something that needs a lot of care and counseling generally, to get through, but it does get better on the other side. And so, yeah, you can certainly gain weight. And like, I said with Kelly Hogan, she put on weight, and other people do put on weight. And even though they have a lot of excess weight, it's like, well, why is my body doing this? Well, they're probably in the same situation metabolically. They've sort of damaged their internal workings to the extent that their body's just like, no, we're going to keep this. We got to store this. We got to do this. But eventually, to anthropomorphize our biochemistry a little, your body's going to say, okay, I trust you now. You're not going to screw me over. Like, okay, we'll let it go now. And you just sort of win back your body's trust, and then it goes back to normal. So yeah, that is something that you see.
Cool. So, I had a question. So obviously you would get a lot of people saying, oh, what about vegetables? Where's the benefits from them? Don't you need those benefits? And one of the big thing that comes up is phytonutrients. So what would you say to that? And do we need phytonutrients?
Yeah, well, so phytonutrients is sort of this mystery word. I mean, what is it? What are the phytonutrients? Like, what are these things? Do we have them named and labeled and cataloged? And do we understand why we need them in our biochemistry? It's just sort of a general thing, like people say, like, when you go running, you release these endorphins and you feel, okay, which endorphins? Like, what is you releasing? It's just this general term is very vague and doesn't necessarily refer to anything real. Like I said, like plants have nutrients in them that are going to be good for other living things, because they're living things, but they're going to protect that as well. So maybe you'll get some nutrients, but you'll also get some harmful chemicals as well. And also a lot of those nutrients are not bioavailable. The plant tries to restrict access to that. And we don't have, the hardware and the machinery, to break down a lot of these chemical bonds that the plant has wrapped these nutrients up in. The short answer is no, we don't need these things, because you get everything you need from if you're eating your species specific biologically appropriate diet, which all species of animals have on Earth. They have a diet that is optimal for that species. If you are eating that, then no, you don't need to eat anything else, because you'll get everything you need in the proportion that you need it. And I think all the best evidence shows that humans are carnivores as a species, and biologically, biochemically and physiologically and genetically and anthropologically and paleoanthropologically, we are carnivores. That's what all the evidence is showing. So meat's going to have everything you need in the proportion that you need it. Can you get some nutrition from plants? Sure. Are they vital and necessary? No, not at all. You can get vital minerals and nutrients like magnesium, zinc, and iron from eating dirt. That doesn't make us dirtivores. That doesn't mean we have to eat dirt, but like pregnant women who are deficient in their diet, they'll get pica. And that causes them to just eat dirt because, oh my God, it just tastes so good. I just have it. I have these crazy cravings because their body's so devoid of generally iron, is why they go for the dirt, that they start eating dirt, actual dirt. And so, like, just because you can get nutrients from something does not mean that that's food for us, right? It just means that we're awesome and we can get a lot of nutrients from crazy things that you never would have thought of. The phytonutrients, sometimes they talk about these things. Some of these things, I've heard some lecturers talk about how you really need to eat the fiber with the plant. You don't want to just like juice vegetables or something like that, because you really want the fiber. The fiber has a lot of these phytonutrients. And basically what it came down to is those phytonutrients wrapped up in the fiber helped you digest and process all the nutrients found in the plant. It helped you process plants, right? But they didn't really do anything else. So if you didn't eat the plant, you didn't need those phytonutrients, right? So it's sort of like a circular argument. You need these phytonutrients so that you can unlock these nutrients in these plants, and these plants, help you get, help with, Jesus Christ, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, you want to get the phytonutrients so that you can better unlock the nutrients that are in the plants that are not very accessible to us, but you will get everything that you need just from eating meat. So you don't need to eat the plant in the first place. So yeah, if you're eating plants, sure, eat the fiber too, and those phytonutrients can be helpful. But if you're not eating any of them at all, then you don't need them at all. And so that's the main thing with phytonutrients.
Very cool.
Kind of switching topic. A lot of my friends have been coming at me with this argument. We have sometimes argument, omnivore versus carnivore or whatever. And they say to me, oh, but we've grown so much in size in the last 50 years. I think 50 years ago, we were a couple of inches shorter on average or something like that compared to where we are today. I was kind of stumped at this. What are your thoughts on that, Dr. Chaffee?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when you think about omnivores versus carnivores, you have to sort of depends on your definition of terms, right? So like, just saying omnivores because we can eat other things, we can eat plants, and we can eat animals. Does that mean that we're omnivores? Well, we show that you can eat dirt and, get nutrition from that. We're not dirtivores. And you can drink Coca-Cola and get vital, necessary, life preserving calories from Coke, but you can't just eat Coke, eat dirt, and drink Coke, eat dirt, and take a multivitamin. That's food. That we're just perfectly fine. No, that's insane. So just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. Doesn't mean that we will benefit over other things, right? So I think that we actually are carnivores. I think we actually are obligate carnivores because we have to have meat. There are nutrients found in meat that we have to have, that we cannot get from plants, but there is nothing in plants that we have to have that we cannot get from meat. So I think that means that we're obligate carnivores. We are obligated to eat meat. We have to eat meat. We don't need to eat plants. We come from an herbivorous past more recently than canines and felines. And so we have a bit more defenses against defense chemicals. Most plants will just kill off any cat or any feline, right? And yet we still give them, grain and plant-based kibble, right?
Yeah.
Because it's cheap and it's filler, right?
Yeah.
And they can survive, but that doesn't mean that they're thriving. That doesn't mean that they're going to be as healthy as they possibly could be, right? So does that, and felines are classified as obligate carnivores, right? And yet they can survive on this kibble, right? So does that make them omnivores? I don't think so. So I think the same applies to us. Now, while we can eat more plants with less harm than felines can, that doesn't mean that that's going to be good for us or optimal. And I don't think that means that we're omnivores. As to the height thing, well, there's a lot of different things that come into play with height. So, we're taller now than we were then. Okay, well, we're eating a lot more processed food and sugar. Does that mean that processed food and sugar is better for us? Probably not. The average height of a population is generally the average health of a population, but it can also have to do with access as much as quality of the food that people are eating. During the 20th century, we had massive famines and tens of millions of people that died in the different communist regimes through forced starvations and things like that, like Mao Zedong and the Holodomor famine in the Ukraine that killed 6 million people. People were turning to cannibalism. At that time, they were killing and eating their own children. It was crazy. There's actually posters going up because it was so widespread that there's posters up in towns that said, "It is barbaric to eat your children." You can Google that. You can find that out. You can actually find the images of these horrific events still on Google. And if you want nightmares for the rest of your life, you can do that. I still have these images burned into my head because I was dumb enough to do it myself. It's absolutely terrifying. So that's the thing too, and you have throughout history, generally food was harder to come by than it is now. We have an abundance of food now. It was really like Richard Nixon in America said, "Hey, we need to do something. We need to make food readily available and really cheap. We need an overabundance of food." So they really started ramping up ways of making that happen. And so now we have, I don't think anyone would argue that certainly in Western countries we have an overabundance of food, right? And probably a paucity of nutrition. It's not very nutritious food. It's just, calorically dense. But, of course, when you have more people that are overfed versus underfed, you're gonna grow taller, because you're not starving and shrinking them. You look at the impoverished class, the lowest 20 percentile economic percentile in America, they're on average heavier and more overweight than the rest of the population. I guess because they're just so hungry, and because they can't afford to eat, right? So even the lowest economic quintile has an overabundance of nutrition now. So obviously that's going to play a major role in average height. Whereas 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, the problem was not getting enough food, as opposed to eating garbage processed slop that we do now.
And also looking back in history, like looking really far back, you can see a lot of the fossil records of humans being a lot taller. Do you have any more insights than that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So when you look at these primitive populations, especially like the big mammoth hunters back in the ice ages, they were very, very tall. So depending on the area and the time, they could be on average, anywhere from like 5'10" to 6'2", some as much as 6'4" on average. Okay, so that's on average adult male height. Okay, so these are very tall individuals. Obviously, there's variations between individuals, but the average was well over 6 feet. And the average adult male height in America now, whether it's taller now than it was 50 years ago, I haven't looked at that statistic, but right now it's 5'8", right? That's tiny, that's, and so, and, in China, it's like 5'6" or so. And so, that's the average for adult male height. Like that's quite a lot shorter than what we're seeing in the fossil record from people, even the Native Americans, much taller than that. There's different, paintings, depictions, and, recorded events of, Jefferson meeting different Native Americans. These guys were all pushing 7 feet tall. And there's paintings of these guys. They're like, oh, wow, look at these guys. They have such small heads, and they were like, well, no, that's because that guy's 7 foot tall. He actually has a big head. It's just his body's even bigger. And so Steve Finney actually did talk about that, and he showed the pictures of that guy. So if you guys want to look into that, so people were much taller, and generally that was because they were healthier and they were eating healthier food. But you also have to have enough food, right? So if you're eating mammoths and you're hunting mammoths and you're scaring a herd of mammoth over a cliff and they crash and burn at the bottom, you have food for the next 10 years. It's just, you've got an overabundance. So a lot of these guys actually had a great abundance of really, really good high quality nutrition. They would do the buffalo drops in North America as well. When the buffalo would come through, the different tribes in that area would scare off a number of them over a cliff. They'd fall and die, and they would be able to process them and dry them and make pemmican, and they would eat that throughout the year. And so that one big hunt allowed the whole tribe to eat for the year. And then they would do it again the next year, and they would hunt in between and all that sort of stuff. But generally, they just had an abundance of food. And so these guys were going to be taller. So in those areas that had, a surplus of food and good nutrition, they were actually much taller than we see now. Now we have the abundance of food and access to calories, but it's just not that great quality. And so we're not seeing the benefits of that. And we're not seeing that average height being what it could be.
Yeah. I had a bit of an insight with that, actually. So you said that the average height in China is around 5'6". And if you actually look at a graph that shows the highest animal consumption, Hong Kong has the highest meat consumption in the world and like the highest life expectancy. So would you not think they'd be a little bit taller? I know China isn't just Hong Kong, but
yeah, no, I definitely would think that, and that's something that would be good to look into. If you look at just look at the people that immigrate from China to America or other Western countries like Australia. Quite often you have these little wizened, tiny parents who lived through these famines and depressions, and they're stunted. Their growth is stunted. And then they come over to the West, and their kids are like 6'4", because they have all this access to food and nutrition. I went to school with several of these guys, and where their parents were, tiny little people, and they were monsters. It was just like, you adopted or something, like what's going on? But that's where that comes from. And then if you look back at like the Qin dynasty that made China, that sort of conglomerated all the different sort of warring factions and tribes and entities. I was reading somewhere that their soldiers were on average like 6'2", 6'3", right? So again, this is these big bastards, and this was before the institution of like widespread rice cultivation and things like that. And then you sort of see the average height start to creep down. But yeah, you would expect to see that. And that's not something I've looked up, though. That would be interesting to look up what the average height in Hong Kong is. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Just Google that.
Yeah. Also, on the topic of fiber, a lot of people say, "Oh, if you don't eat fiber, you're going to get colon cancer." Is there any validity to that statement?
No, God, no, absolutely not. No. So that's not even something that was ever asserted in any of the epidemiological studies and things like that.
Is colon cancer the same as diverticulosis, or is that different?
It's different. Yeah, so diverticulosis is like an outpouching of the
Yeah, yeah.
colon,
Okay.
and so you get these little sort of bubbles. They literally look like bubbles on the outside of the colon, and that sort of that muscle sort of failing and pushing out, and so you're sort of stretching and pulling and doing all these sorts of things, and it's just it's messing it up. There was a very good study with over 2,000 people doing all these different colonoscopies, and they found that the only two things that corresponded with diverticulosis was increased fiber consumption and increased number of bowel motions a day, right? So you have all this fiber and it's just creating a lot of bulk, and it's just stretching out your intestine. That's just going to stretch and stretch and stretch. And just like you can get diverticulae on your bladder as well, from like you're holding your pee for too long, and you just eventually just sort of stretches out, and you get these stretch injuries, and you start getting these diverticulae. Same idea. You're eating a ton of fiber, and just you have all this bulk and just stretches all this stuff out, and then you're also just sort of working it. And I think you just wear out that organ eventually. Constipation was not a factor. Meat was not a factor. Fat was not a factor. It was fiber and increased number of bowel motions a day. They had a strong correlation as well. It was like a 500 to 600% increased correlation between those two. So it was quite strong. The idea about bowel cancer, that one is just so silly. We tell, first of all, when people get bowel cancer, we tell them do not eat any fiber because you're going to get an obstruction, because you don't want any of that bulk getting in the way. And when you have diverticulitis or you have appendicitis, you tell them don't eat any fiber, because it causes harm, it causes problems, it gets in the way. And so, if fiber was so good for you, why would we tell you to stop eating it just when you need it the most? I don't know where the whole idea of not eating fiber comes to bowel cancers comes from, but there's absolutely nothing causative or even strongly correlative that shows that. And then the idea of like meat causing cancer, maybe because it doesn't have fiber, that's completely
It's made of carcinogenics in it.
Absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
People always say that.
Yeah, well, it's not based in anything. There was a study that looked at meat consumption and all the rest, and found this like weak 15% increased correlation between people who ate more meat and bowel cancer, right? But you have to consider that a lot of these things are self-reported surveys, right? Which are stupid. And it's very difficult for people to even know what the hell that they're eating from day to day. And this is something that you'll see a lot of like, nutrition guys like Lane Norton and all these other ones. They just swear by these things, and then pretend that this is decent information to go on. But it's pretty weak evidence in the first place, but also that weak correlation, so that 15% increase, that is basically meaningless. That's just background noise, because you have so many confounding factors. You have so many different things that could be going into this that you really don't even start paying attention to something until it's like at least 200% increased correlation.
Yeah. And
so 15% really doesn't make the mark. And now you have to look at how they got to that 15% in the first place, because first of all, they considered a lot of things meat that I don't think any rational human being would consider meat. Like, because pizza can sometimes have meat as a topping, that was considered meat. So, how many times do you eat pizza a week? It's like, oh, I eat pizza 3 times a week. They eat meat 3 times a week, right? So that's actually in their stupid study. So that was part of it. So, and that's just one example. They also cherry picked. They omitted studies and findings that they didn't like. They had a bunch of vegans and vegetarians and Seventh-day Adventists from Loma Linda on the board on how they were going to decide on what information to use. So it was a very biased piece of work, but it got such hype just because they had a lot of backing behind them, that this just went everywhere. And so I still hear colorectal surgeons talking to patients like, oh yeah, and definitely, don't eat meat, especially don't eat red meat, because it increases your risk of colon cancer. And it's just like, I guarantee you, they have no idea what that's even based on. It's just something that we just repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated, that we just keep repeating it. But that's what it's based on. And University of Washington in Seattle actually just published a paper basically excoriating this, just talking about how much nonsense it is and pointing out all these different flaws. There was actually an abstract of a paper with hundreds of thousands of patients from Harvard that they did in 2004, looking at this, and they found that there was absolutely no correlation between intake of meat and bowel cancer. And for some reason, curiously enough, they decided not to publish it. Why is that? They spent millions of dollars looking at hundreds of thousands of patients, but it concluded something they didn't want it to conclude. And so they decided not to publish it, but the abstract's available, and you can find the abstract. So it's, there's a lot of politics involved in the scientific literature, and it gets worse than that. I mean, a lot of these things are industry funded. There was actually a company that had a team here in Perth look at the biome sort of what is it? What is that stuff? The stuff you eat to increase your microbiome.
Kefir.
Yeah, but that sort of stuff. What's the general term for that? God damn it, I'm just blanking. Anyway, the probiotics.
Oh yeah.
Probiotics, yeah.
Sorry, I've not slept enough. So it's a company that made probiotics, and they had like one little basically test sample with like 6 patients. And they found like, oh yeah, okay, this is better. These probiotics are better, and so this help your health. And so then they actually wanted to do a larger study. Say, hey, let's do a big study. So they had a team do it here with a big study with thousands of patients, and they found that actually it doesn't actually help, and it may actually be worse, but it doesn't help anyway. And so they were going to publish this, and they basically got slapped in the face with a threatened lawsuit that says, if you publish that, we'll sue you. And so the abstract's available, but they weren't able to publish the study because it was funded by the industry, and it didn't look good for the industry. And so they said, nope, you can't publish that. So there is research going out that actually goes against the commercial interests of various groups, or the ideological interests of various people and groups, and so they don't see the light of day. And then other studies that are maybe fraudulent, or at least tampered with. Certainly all the studies looking at cholesterol and saturated fat, those were just all garbage, and they've been shown to be garbage. This is in the published peer-reviewed literature now, that was nonsense, and that saturated fat and cholesterol absolutely never were even correlated with heart disease. And that's what all the big meta-analyses in the last couple of years have shown as well. There isn't even a correlation between saturated fat or cholesterol and heart disease.
Is that since the 2015 Harvard thing? Is that since that, when they paid out 3? Is that since that sort of?
So which one with Harvard? Sorry.
I saw one of your videos. They said in 2015 Harvard had to come up with a statement to explain the horrible advice from the USDA or something.
I hadn't actually seen that. In 2016, the Journal of the American Medical Association, which is one of the top medical journals in the world, published a paper from University of California, San Francisco, which is a top 10 medical research institution. And they actually published the actual internal memos from the sugar companies back in the the 60s, talking about how they paid off 3 Harvard professors to falsify data and publish fraudulent studies. To make it look like cholesterol is causing heart disease, and to exonerate sugar, because there were studies coming out and people saying like, oh, I think actually sugar is direct rise in heart disease when sugar and refined sugar increases in the population. And so they're like, oof, we need to protect that. And so one of those professors was named head of the USDA, and he was the one who authored and published the 1977 USDA declaration that said cholesterol causes heart disease. And so that just changed the world. And so we know that was fraud. We know that was bought and paid for. We know that that was garbage. Even like the Framingham study, that was crazy too. I was taught that in medical school in 2009, that the Framingham study showed that the more total cholesterol this population had, like 30,000 people follow for like 20, 30 years, that the more cholesterol that they had, the more cardiovascular accidents that they had, so like strokes and heart attack. And that was what was reported by the American Heart Association 2 years after the conclusion of this study. The problem is that the study itself actually found the opposite. It literally found the opposite, that the lower your cholesterol, the more cardiovascular accidents you were having, and the higher the better. So it was actually protective. And then that was misreported. You have to assume fraudulently by the American Heart Association 2 years later. It was literally the exact opposite conclusion that the study found. And so, and there's other examples of that as well, that, Ansel Keys in the 7 Nations study, he had complete data for, 22, 23 countries, and he decided not to use them because they didn't fit his line. And it's just nonsense. So, in half of his, over half of his countries, it showed no correlation, no relationship, between saturated fat, cholesterol, and heart disease. And so, if you can't even show correlation, then that means that that there's no causation. But the thing is that there's never been any high level evidence showing causation between heart disease, cardiovascular illnesses, and saturated fat or cholesterol. Just none. There's none. There's no high level evidence to show that. All it is low level correlative studies. That's it. There's nothing that shows causation, not a single thing. And all the randomized control trials that with tens of thousands of patients, all of them showed that saturated fat was better than polyunsaturated fats, and that when you reduce cholesterol, there's a study looking at linoleic acid. They replaced saturated fats with linoleic acid, and they found that yes, your LDL cholesterol goes down, your total cholesterol goes down, heart attacks and strokes go up, death from heart attacks and strokes go up as well. There's a study, or 2 studies actually, looking at heart attacks in America. Over 140,000 participants in the study had a heart attack in America, and they found that literally 50-50 split either had low cholesterol or high cholesterol. So isn't even like 52%, had high cholesterol. I'm like, oh, okay, there's this 2%. No, it's dead even, 50-50, right? And then they followed them. One of the studies, they followed them for 2 years afterwards, and they found, and people were still saying, oh, you got to lower your cholesterol, even though they had low cholesterol, right? And even though half the people, who got a heart attack had low cholesterol, they're telling people with high cholesterol, get your cholesterol down. So they found that the people that kept their cholesterol low, or God forbid, lowered their cholesterol from high, that they were twice as likely to have died in the intervening time. And so by the 2-year checkup. So it's just simply not what we've been told. What we've been led to believe. And there's been a lot of lies and fraud and things that really should land people in jail. And had like the cigarette companies having to pay like hundreds of billions of dollars because they tampered with the data and evidence as well, and it's hurt a lot of people. I think that the same thing should happen with the sugar companies and the scientists and researchers involved with that. A massive level of misinformation and fraud.
It's completely unbelievable that these studies that were done so long ago that have been shown to be fraudulent and not actually correct, that because it was done so long ago and we've just had that consistent reinforcement every single generation, that it's just so ingrained into the society that it seems like we can't change the narrative at all. It's so deeply rooted into so many people. And even if you try to tell them to have an open mind, but still just deep rooted inside of them, there's something telling them that meat gives you cancer or whatever it is. It's unbelievable, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've been getting it drilled into our heads literally our entire lives. I'm not so old that like I remember a time that this was never, being said. My entire life, my entire living memory is saying fat's bad, don't eat fat, fat's bad. Like that. That's like I grew up with that. We had like it was like wheat bran nonsense cereal and like shredded wheat. It's disgusting. I hated that stuff. but that was it, Cheerios were normal. Shredded wheat was awful. And then like, if it was like a treat, we get like Rice Krispies, or cornflakes, you know what I mean? That was a treat in my house. And, so it was always just, low fat, no fat, trim all the fat. Oh my God. I was making some top ramen once, just like ramen noodles, and they deep fry the noodles. And my dad was like, oh my God, you're going to clog your arteries. I'm like, I'm 6, and and I remember thinking, I was like, I don't think it's coming to me yet. I think I'll be fine. But even just that little amount of fat, like that had, my parents worried, and so, it's just instilled in us and ingrained in us, to stay away from this stuff. And unfortunately people listened, and they got very, very hurt as a result. Just looking at our fat and cholesterol intake, over the last 40 years, we've reduced it significantly by about a third. And heart disease rates have tripled, so how are we saying that heart disease is caused by a direct relationship, a direct causative link between cholesterol and heart disease? When you reduce cholesterol, and heart disease rates triple, if anything, you would say that maybe it's protective. And in fact, we're finding that in these big meta-analyses, finding no correlation between high fat and high cholesterol and heart disease and stroke. They're finding inverse relationships, right? So they're finding that the higher your LDL cholesterol and saturated fat intake, the lower your heart attack and stroke rates, right? And vice versa. You start dropping those down, stroke rates, heart attack rates go up, right? So what in God's name are we doing here?
Have you had your bloods done recently, Chafee, or would you care to share it, or you don't want to put it online, the cholesterol and stuff? Or
oh yeah, I haven't checked my bloods in
like testosterone and stuff,
probably 2 years, something like that. Yeah. So last time I got a check, I was sort of in the high normal range, and
what's like
all my bloods were. Sorry.
What's like the optimal HDL, LDL to triglycerides? Like, what's a good thing to look out for? Because I don't know what the doctor tells me. It's a bit.
Yeah. So the main thing with cholesterol is you want your HDL to be above the level, like all those levels and everything are a bit wonky, because again, cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease, right? And it's not a marker of heart disease necessarily. Triglycerides, maybe. That's when you start running into problems. And then, there's a lot of different kinds of LDL as well. There's multiple different kinds of particulate sizes for LDL cholesterol. And so when you start breaking those down, some of those will start be indicating, but those are indications of poor metabolic health and damage to your body. And those are just being damaged along the line, as well as the rest of your body, that can then lead to atherosclerosis. So there's a correlation there, but not a causation, right? Not necessarily causation. And so when you're looking at cholesterol, I think the only things that are worth looking at are HDL and triglycerides. If your HDL is up above where the normal range is, up in the good range, then that's good. And if your triglycerides are below what is good to be below, then that's good too. And looking at the ratio is good as well, but without sort of confusing too many people, if your HDL is in the proper range and triglycerides are in the proper range, you don't need to worry about anything else. Everything else is good. That's an indication that you're not damaging the rest of your cholesterol, and you're not damaging the rest of your body as well. And you're going to be very, very, very low risk of heart disease at that point.
Cool. Yeah. So you said that you said you had like over 100 of your patients in the carnivore diet, and you're getting blood tests for them. In terms of testosterone increasing the carnivore diet, and maybe in more the men, have you seen any crazy like testosterone transformations, like double or triple? Or,
yeah. Well, one guy who's like 65, and his like slammed up. So we look at different reference ranges. You look at just the normal reference range. You're looking at the average for that population, right? That's why reference ranges change in every location, or even every lab in the same city, because basically the first 2,000 people that walk in the door every year, that becomes their reference range, right? So that's normal, right? But who goes against blood tests? Usually people who are sick and they're trying to find something out, and so that's not a good marker. And when you look at the fact that anywhere from like 88 to 93% of the population is metabolically unhealthy. Why are we trying to see where we stack up in the population? I want to look at what my patient's bloods are compared to someone who's healthy and in the prime of life. And so we look at a different set of ranges that normally you would see someone in their mid-20s, male and female, that would that are healthy, that are metabolically healthy, don't have any medical issues, and what are their ranges, right? So we look at that as sort of a range of healthy young adults. And so when you look at that, testosterone is a very different range, and sort of between like 600 and 900 is a good range for testosterone in men in Australia. And I've seen guys. This one guy, he was like 65, and he probably had testosterone probably around 300, and it just slammed up, and he was just like he was like close to 900, right? And it just like went woof up to the upper.
How long?
About 3 months. Yeah.
Wow, that's insane.
And so it was like this guy was juicing or something like that, but he wasn't on anything. He wasn't on anything. I don't like putting people on hormone replacement therapy unless they've been on carnivore for at least 3 to 6 months, and we see where their hormones shake out. I mean, putting people on bioidentical hormones is I don't think there's a problem with that per se, but I also don't think it's really that necessary. When you get someone on a carnivore diet, you generally see most of their hormonal issues correct themselves, and then even if it's not exactly what you'd see in a 25-year-old, they still feel great. And their bodies are still working wonderfully. So they tend to not even want it or need it. So this guy, it jacked up to like nearly 900, which is like the upper range for like, a really healthy 25-year-old. And he was funny. He was just like, I just have so much energy. Like all I want to do is work out and like, do stuff with my wife. And he used, more vulgar terms than that. And it was quite funny how this guy was like, he's going through puberty again. You see him just charged up with energy. So, he felt really great. Generally we see probably around 30 to 40% bump in testosterone in about 3 months. That's generally what we see. Yeah, it's huge. It's very big. And the thing is too, is it's not just the total, cholesterol or the total testosterone numbers that are changing, but your body's ability to utilize testosterone changes as well. Your DHA, so your dihydrotestosterone, DHT, ratios change as well. It's a more bioactive form of testosterone. So those levels will improve. And also your testosterone receptors improve as well, and even just from and how your body just utilizes these things improves, right? So carnitine, there've been studies showing that increased carnitine consumption can actually increase the number of testosterone receptors on your cells, right? So for the same amount of testosterone, you're getting a bigger effect, right? Wow. So carnitine is in a lot of animal products, but there's a ton of it in red meat. And so, a lot of people, when they go back to carnivore, a lot of them are eating red meat. They're focusing on ruminant animals and red meat. That's the first one we drop when we go vegetarian or just try to change our health in the last 50 years, because they said, cholesterol is bad, saturated fat is bad. Red meat has a lot of saturated fat and cholesterol. So they reduced that down. And actually, like chicken mostly has replaced that. So, total amount of meat that we've been eating hasn't really changed too much, but the kinds of meat has changed dramatically. We reduced our red meat consumption significantly, and that's something that people tend to go back to when they start doing this. They find that they feel much better on red meat. I almost exclusively eat red meat. About 99% of what I eat is just beef steaks.
Have any processed meats like bacon or sausage or?
Almost never sausage. But bacon sometimes, yeah. But I try to go for like natural bacon with like no sugar.
Nitrates. Yeah.
Sorry?
Like no nitrates in the bacon, because
I'm not too worried about the nitrates. Your saliva makes more nitrates than you'll find in bacon, and then sometimes you'll see like the celery powder or something like that. That's because celery has way more nitrates than bacon has. So
grass fed as well.
Sorry?
You go grass fed as well, or grass fed?
Yeah, for pigs, I don't know if grass is really their main thing, but like I don't even know what the hell a pig is supposed to eat, but they
Sorry, I
generally.
mean for meat, for like red meat. Sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah. They, that's, I think it's better. I definitely like it more. I don't have as much access here, and so I think that just store bought meat is fine. I actually predominantly just eat just Costco beef that's grain finished. Any cow is, even if it's grain finished, is going to be 80% of its life is going to be on grass. And so, and it'll change some of the things like, after about 3 months in a feedlot, the cow will sort of lose out on most of its like omega-3s. Most of it will be omega-6s after that. And so, that's something to think about. So there are going to be subtle differences, but I think that, you're looking at these differences sort of under a magnifying glass, right? Versus these stark differences and contrast between red meat and everything else, So I think of it sort of as the Olympics, right? So, person who got, gold and silver medal at the Olympics, right? So silver medal lost to gold, right? But the silver medalist also beat everyone else on earth. And that's sort of how I think about it. So grain finished beef, I think, is maybe not as perfect as grass finished, but it's still better than anything else you will ever eat.
Dr. Chafee, a lot of people are in my comments as well asking if I drink coffee. And at the start of my carnivore diet, I actually was drinking coffee, maybe 2 to 3 coffees a day. But I've quit coffee for the last 7 days, and I'm kind of feeling a bit different effects, not anything super positive just yet. But what are your kind of thoughts on coffee on the carnivore diet?
So coffee, I think is, I sort of think a lot of these things are on sort of the broad stroke sort of things, humans we're designed to eat meat. We can get nutrition out of plants and as well, but we really are optimally fed through meat, fatty meat in particular. And that plants have defense chemicals that are going to harm you, right? So coffee bean is a bean. A bean is a seed. A seed is a plant's baby. Generally, things protect their babies more than anything, and so this is where you'll largely find the highest level of toxins is going to be in the seed, and this is why you have to roast these things. You have to cook the hell out of them to try to denature some of these toxins that are in there. But they still exist. There's still things in there. I mean, caffeine in and of itself can be harmful. This was originally an insecticide. This was hundreds of millions of years ago. These plants developed caffeine in order to kill insects that were trying to eat them. So I think that a lot of these things are problematic. At the end of the day, it really just depends on how you feel. I've always felt better without coffee. For some reason, it always reacted strangely with me. I just never really felt good on it, and I felt better without it. And so when I first went carnivore, I would drink coffee every now and then. Never really was all over it, but I've been doing carnivore again for like a few weeks, and I just wanted to sort of see certain things. Like maybe someone would come up and I'd order meat and maybe it has some sauce on it and be like, oh, I don't really want that, but let's see how it affects me. And I would just test it, and I would feel worse. And I would just be like, oh, well, I don't want that. That just reinforces that. And so I tried that with coffee. I had just done like crazy workouts that week, and just got back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh, and volunteering in the refugee camps there. And I was really out of shape, and I was just slamming back into it. And I was like amazed that I couldn't get sore. I was like, this is crazy. Like, how is this happening? So I was just pushing myself hard and hard just to see if I could make myself sore, and I couldn't do it. And so I ended up with, a couple of days after, doing a very, very heavy set of workouts and rugby training and hiking and lifting weights. I was meeting a friend for coffee, and I thought to myself, okay, well, let's see what this does. Can I have coffee? Is coffee going to agree with me? And I had 1 cup of black coffee, and within 20 minutes, all my muscles that I've been working out were just all getting stiffer and sore, and I could actually feel it happening in real time. I was just like, oh, okay, what's happening? Like my hamstrings are getting a little more. My back started hurting. I'm like, what's happening? Wow. I was sore for the next 2 days. And so, I don't want that. I don't want that in my life. I always took working out and being sore in certain areas, that was an indication that I'd worked out hard. So I was like, oh, that's good. I'm putting in a lot of good work. But I can tell you, not being sore all the time is way better. It's way better. And so, you drink coffee, all of a sudden I'm stiff and sore and have pain. It's hard for me to get out of bed in the morning. No, thank you. So whether or not there's a study or this or that shows benefit or harm from coffee, I just know how it affects me, and I know how that I feel better without it. And so I just stay away from it. And then, empirically, this is going to have harmful substances in it that are going to do something to your body. And I saw that manifest as pain and soreness.
Yeah, that's interesting. A lot of people in the comment sections and a lot of just kids in this modern generation and our age struggle with ADHD. And I know you're a neurosurgeon, although I know you wouldn't probably prescribe medications or anything. What's your thoughts on, because I've noticed such big improvements with my ADHD and stuff. So what's your thoughts on the carnivore diet and maybe why it improves ADHD, or can it cure it, and the danger of drugs?
Well, it's interesting. There are more and more pieces of information coming out, and there are a lot of other psychiatrists and psychologists and researchers that are showing more and more that these psychological issues and even psychiatric issues, like even schizoaffective disorder, and major depression, anxiety, and bipolar, OCD, all these things, they actually come down to like metabolic issues and damage to the mitochondria and the energy production therein, which a lot of diseases boil down to. You start damaging and messing around with the mitochondria, you really start causing serious harm. And that's actually something that, carbohydrates in general can sort of, mess with how your mitochondria work. And, there's studies showing that people that go on a ketogenic diet, go into ketosis, they end up having more mitochondria. They have 4 times the amount of mitochondria, and they're 4 times as efficient at metabolizing energy. So you're getting a big bonus. Cancer as well. Cancer seems to be a metabolic mitochondrial disease. When I was taking cancer biology, all these carcinogens that were in plants, these things largely damaged the mitochondria. And now I just read an article just this week, actually, talking about how these different conditions like ADHD and schizophrenia and all these other things come down, that they're looking more like they're metabolic issues as well. Wow. And so, changing your diet and changing your lifestyle will significantly change your metabolism and change your metabolic state, and can seriously help these metabolic issues. And so it's no surprise that that's happening. We don't really know, or at least I'm not aware of any direct mechanism yet, but we've seen a number of studies, and people have seriously improved their ADD and other issues by just going on a keto diet, let alone carnivore. We don't really have studies just looking at straight up carnivore. There's the one sort of epidemiological sort of survey study that Harvard did, but again, that has all the limitations of these epidemiological surveys, right? But it was interesting. It did show that just everyone was just like, yeah, got better. Everything's better, so much better in a lot of different ways. And that was really interesting. But for ADHD in particular, sorry?
Medications as well that they're just prescribing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, medications are just sort of putting a patch on things, right? Because, unless you have like an actual hormonal deficiency, like you don't produce insulin and you need insulin, so you inject insulin, or you don't have a thyroid, you have that taken out for some reason, and you need to be given thyroid medication, or you damage your pituitary, and same idea. Then you're just replacing something that your body can't make naturally, right? But that's not what's happening with ADHD, right? So, the reason that someone has ADHD is not because their brains don't make enough methamphetamines, right? And so, so you have like dexamphetamines and other sorts of amphetamines that seem to help in a lot of ways, but it's helping, but it's sort of putting a patch on something. It's not addressing the underlying root cause of the issue. And so I just think that we've gotten far too lazy almost in the medical profession by just trying to prescribe medications that just puts patches on things instead of fixing the problem. Instead of saying, okay, why is this happening? Why is it that the prevalence of ADHD is increasing dramatically year by year? Oh, it's probably because it just wasn't diagnosed before. Nonsense. This is something we've known about for a very long time. And the fact of the matter is that we've known about this for a long time, and we've been looking at this in young patients, especially like early on. Everyone's got ADHD. If anyone just acted out in class, just put them on the drugs. So it was actually way over diagnosed before. It's still going up. It's going up. Okay, so it was already overdiagnosed, and now it's going up from there. So are we just going crazy and overdiagnosing this, or is this actually becoming more of a problem? But either way, the cause of ADHD is not a lack of dexamphetamine. It's not that your body's just not making dexamphetamine and you need to replace that, right? Diabetes is not caused by a lack of metformin. Like, that's just not what it is. It's just something that helps in that that disease state. So I think that this is something that, the further away we go from our proper biological diet, sort of the more problems we're going to have. And we're really pushing this whole, processed garbage is just getting much more prevalent. It's just easy to do. And so people aren't like cooking for themselves. They're not eating whole foods. Even no matter what they eat, you eat whole foods, you're probably going to be doing better. Obviously, most plants will just kill you. But like if you're eating, the so-called edible plants that are less toxic, and you're cooking them yourself and you're preparing themselves, and you're at least cooking them and preparing them in ways that sort of detoxify these things to a certain degree, which you can do, you're going to be far better off than eating this processed stuff. Processed how? What does it do? Well, it's mostly they add a bunch of sugar and carbs, all of which are plants. So, I was talking to someone the other day, like, oh no, it's processed. No, it's processed plants. And so you go vegan, you're replacing super toxic plants with not as toxic plants. Still plants, like just get rid of the damn plants. And so you can see a contrast, because you're replacing something far worse with something not as bad. So yeah, so the main thing is that finding the underlying cause and sort of addressing that. And it looks like more of these issues are metabolic issues, and that if you're able to eat properly, your metabolism and you get into a proper metabolic state and your body is functioning more naturally, a lot of these problems should go away. And it does seem to be that ADHD is falling into that category of something that can be fixed with metabolic changes, which is great. I don't think that we know exactly what's causing it and exactly what's going on, but we do see that people are benefiting from dietary changes. And so it will be very interesting to find out more about that. But at the end of the day, we are seeing that people are having good results. And so if someone is suffering from this, it is ultimately worth a try. Even if it doesn't help your ADHD, there are 1,000 other ways that changing your diet in this manner will help you. And so even if it doesn't fix that, it will sure make your life a lot easier to deal with the ADHD as a result. And like you've noticed yourself, a lot of people are finding that it's actually really helping them as well.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, you've been super generous with your time. We're so appreciative. It's been seriously an amazing 2 hours to speak with you. We're so grateful for that. Anthony Chaffee, where can we find you? And we'll make sure to link everything below, but where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, well, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having me on, and wish you luck with your channel and everything you're going for. It's great just to have more and more voices out there. Because it just gets the spread out there, it just gets to reach out there, and it gets people access to this sort of information, and hopefully, they can take it on board and benefit their lives, which I think is really, admirable. So, Yeah, my main social media is just Instagram, and that's just my name, Anthony Chaffee, MD. My YouTube is the same thing, Anthony Chaffee, MD, and that's where I have all my videos and podcasts as well. And then my podcast on pretty much any podcast channel is just called the Plant Free MD. As for as you would guess, that's sort of my whole way of coming to carnivore, is just avoiding plants in general. And then on Twitter, I'm like Anthony_Chaffee, which I'm becoming more active in recently. And then a few other things as well, but you can probably find all that through my link tree in my Instagram. People can find that there.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure to link those below. But yeah, thank you so much again, Chafee.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, not a problem, guys.